really pleased to hear about the Rainbow Project, the Philadelphia experiment, the Phoenix Project, all that good stuff. And so I guess you can all take it the way you want, you know, as one after another, while he puts on his sunglasses. And this is really, I think, a memorable event. And so you guys can take on the project, and thanks for being here.
Go ahead.
Well, Preston, why don't you start? All right. Well, we're here tonight. We have with us Mr. Bielek, who is from the Eldridge for the Philadelphia experiment, the older fellow that went back to 43. We also have with us Mr. Cameron, who is also off the Eldridge. Two of the craziest people in the world. Now, compliment.
They're not so crazy, they survived.
We're here at the auspices of the, what's it, Galuppi?
Yeah, Filippo Galuppi.
Galuppi brothers.
Right.
We're here in this nice, beautiful home in Blue Point. This home has to be at least $250,000.
I hope so. Three-quarter.
Or $750,000, whatever. And I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Why don't you start with what Montauk was about, how it tied into the Philadelphia experiment.
A brief synopsis, maybe, of the...
Okay, first of all, I got to find the
However, you want to start with Philadelphia and then go to however you want.
How it ties in?
I first have to find the power cord. I got a place to plug this power cord and start up the tape recorder.
Go.
There, plugged in. All right, way back when. Let's start with the Phoenix Project. Phoenix Project is a carry-on from the Philadelphia experiment. That was a...
Can you hear them? Can you hear them okay?
That was a silly little project that the Navy did back in the 30s and the 40s, attempting to make a battleship invisible. They wanted to make an aircraft carrier invisible. They threw the switch one eventful day, and the ship went into hyperspace with all sorts of problems to the people on the boat. Navy said the thing's a huge failure, it's a huge success, but it's also a huge failure, and they shelved it. In about 47, it was decided, you know, the government can't leave this thing alone. They got a wild effect that they wanted to study. So in 47, they reopened it and started up with what we came later to know as the Phoenix Project. It was originally the Rainbow Project. It was moved to Brookhaven National Laboratories, and Dr. von Neumann and all his associates, this was long before any of us were involved in it, started to replicate this thing. Out of the Phoenix 1, the early project, came the stealth technology, which I cannot talk about. You know, neither of these two guys could talk about the stealth technology, but I cannot talk about it because of my job. And also came out all sorts of energetic little toys, such as radio songs. What is a radio song? Well, if you remember all back when we were kids, we saw these little white plastic boxes that had a white bottle hanging down on it, that they connected to a little red parachute, filled up a balloon with helium, connected the whole thing up in the atmosphere it went. The government told us, hey, this thing is a weather data package. It has a temperature sensor, has a humidity sensor, and it has a pressure sensor in it. And this thing will ultimately transmit temperature data, humidity data, temperature data, reference data. And the switching was controlled by the barometric pressure at the height by what they call the baro switch. This thing used a very unusual type of pulse modulation. In most cases, they used a CW, continuous wave oscillator, and pulsed the thing off. The pulse was pulsing it off. This turned out to be a very efficient conversion of electrical energy to etheric energy. Now, I very recently started collecting radio songs. I don't know why, but I did. I walked in with a radio song, and one of the associates at Space-Time Laboratory says things are a weather control device. So of course that piqued my interest. I'd already known that the humidity sensor was terrible. Its accuracy was a lot to be desired. I'd known the temperature sensor was terrible, and its accuracy had a lot to be desired. And the other unusual thing that I've wondered about is, yeah, I can get all the radio sounds I want. I've never ever seen a receiver for them. So we first did a quote-unquote psychic reading. The Space-Time Laboratories, everybody uses CAD, computer-aided design. The Space-Time Laboratories, we use psychic-aided design. So we had a number of different psychics read on the radio sounds. Weather control device, doorbuster, orgone enhancer. That's the readings that came through. So I got very interested, and I started to ask around about radio sounds. The next thing I found out by word of mouth is these things were designed at Brookhaven National Laboratories up in Long Island, New York, just up the road from this place. And I started to talk to people I know at Brookhaven. Ran across a retired gentleman from Brookhaven who wishes to remain nameless, so I won't name him. He'll stay anonymous. He told me that the design was originally done by a character by the name of Wilhelm Reich. Because that piqued my interest even more. Wilhelm Reich? The story goes that in about 47, Mr. Reich handed the U.S. government a weather control device. A little package that would do door busting. He felt that if he could reduce the amount of door and increase the orgone in the storm wouldn't be violent, it wouldn't have winds, and it wouldn't do the damage. It would be a less violent storm.
What is the DOR?
Deadly orgone. Dead orgone. That's the bad stuff.
And where does that come from?
No one really knows where it comes from. I've heard a number of theories. Well, essentially, orgone can be considered like life energy, energy from life forces, energy from living beings. Dead orgone is the same type of energy but dead. It doesn't have any life in it. It has a tendency to decrease life functions. It reduces life functions. So the government took this little widget that Mr. Reich handed them. He told them, put it on a balloon, send it up. But they put a parachute on it because they didn't want the thing coming down with a big, loud, crashing bang through somebody's skylight, and the government gets sued for all sorts of money. And they send the thing up into a bad storm, and it gets reduced in intensity tremendously. So the government goes back to Reich and says, hey, we like the thing. So they launch another part of the Phoenix project where they designed these radio sounds. This is almost like a little subsection of this, by the way, this story. Now, of course, I dug further and further into it. As I already noted, I talked of the receiver. There are instances where we know they launch these things from every boat at sea, every airport, every weather station. They launch them from planes. At one point in the 50s, there must have been maybe 200 to 500 of these things launched every day. The radio range, being a radio person, I can tell you about that. I checked it. The radio range on these transmitters, even up in the air, maybe is 100 miles. So that means when they launch one of these frequencies, there has to be a receiver close by. They're going to send up a data transmitter and not have, they have to have a receiver. That means if they're sending 200 or more of these things up each day, there's got to be one pile of receivers. These receivers should be very common. Now, I happen to be a receiver collector. I have over 100 receivers in my personal collection of receivers. I have never seen a radio sound receiver. I've heard them, but I've never seen one. I got almost every other receiver that was used in the 40s and the 50s by the military.
I have a question. What is the center frequency without modulation on radio sound transmitter?
403 megahertz and 1680 megahertz. They use two different frequencies.
Okay, they're both on simultaneously?
Huh?
They're both on simultaneously?
No, it's one or the other.
One for primary and one for secondary?
No, it's one transmitter or the other transmitter that's in the package. The early ones are on 403. The later ones,
Exactly?
oh, plus or minus 2 megahertz. And the later ones are on 1680, plus or minus about 6 megahertz.
They were crystal tuned or?
No, they're just free running oscillators.
They're running oscillators.
The 400 megahertz, I was going to get into the details, the technical details, how the radio sound works. All right, this is a good time to go into that. I don't have any illustrative material, so I'll attempt to describe to you people how the circuitry works. It's a very unique system that they had. Essentially, the temperature element was a thermistor type. It is a negatively varying resistance with the temperature. As the resistance goes up, as the temperature goes up, the resistance goes down. Now, I had a mass spectrograph done on one of these thermistors, and I compared it to a YSI thermistor. And they both have carbon in them. They both are essentially carbon, but the radiosonde thermistor had some silver in it, had some gold in it, had some platinum in it, had some iridium. I'm trying to remember the other two elements it had. It has a fair amount of silver in it. Silver was about 10% by weight. Now, for a thermistor, it's not going to make it any more accurate. If anything, it's going to make the curve go really strange. You're placing it with metals like that. Of course, you read Wilhelm Reich literature, you'll find out Reich used sensors that had gold and silver in them. So that's one interesting note there. The humidity element is a plastic plate with silvered edges with a grid of conductive lines going across the plastic plate. This way and this way. This way, this way, this way, this way, this sort of thing. They put on it a very odd mix of chemicals. The chemistry lab has not come back yet what the mix of chemicals is they put on it. Now, the unusual thing about the temperature, the humidity element, is most electrolytic resistors I've ever seen, the resistance goes down as they get damp. These things, the resistance goes up as they get damp. Now, what we're theorizing at this point, which we've proven from the esoteric side, we have no physical data to back it up, is that the thermistor rod, the temperature sensor, the temperature rod, acts like an antenna for the door. It acts like a door antenna out of phase. That's the dead orgone. The humidity sensor acts as an antenna for the orgone. Of course, this parallels the whole idea of, you'll see in esoteric circles, people use salt water solutions with different electrodes in them to detect these energetics with a fair degree of success. Looks like here, Reich took it much further. Now, the pressure sensor is essentially what they call a barrel switch, or a pressure-sensitive cycling switch. As the thing would rise, the pressure would change, and the needle in the little barometer would go across a switch segment, hit the segment of a switch. That drove a relay that would in sequence put either the temperature or the humidity sensor back and forth. It would switch between these two sensors. And it would switch to, which I'll explain in a minute how it's done, to what they call a reference mode in the transmitter. So what they have, as this thing rises and goes above the earth, it transmits a signal that destroys the door, and also transmits a signal after that, or before, however you look at it, that builds up the orgone energies. Now, let's consider the transmitter. The transmitter is a very interesting little beast. It is two oscillators. An oscillator that runs at the carrier frequency, either 403 megahertz or 1680 megahertz. There's a second oscillator, which is a 7 megahertz oscillator coupled into the grid of the carrier oscillator. Now, the control grid of the modulation oscillator, the 7 megahertz oscillator, has an RC network that causes to do the relaxation number. Now, as the oscillator runs, it builds up DC across the grid when the capacitor that's in the RC network for the relaxation oscillator. I have to apologize, I don't have any schematics with me. I didn't expect to talk of this, but there was interest at the table. As that capacitor will build up high enough in charge to put a high negative bias on the grid of the tube, cut the tube off, the oscillator will stop oscillating, of course. The RC network would discharge and pull the voltage down on the capacitor just like a neon bulb oscillator. So essentially that 7 megahertz oscillator would pulse on and off. Now, the lower the resistance, the faster the pulsing would be, and the higher resistance, the slower the pulsing would be. I'm trying to make this as clear as I can without having a schematic to point out. I know, are the two people here following what I'm saying that have some technical background? Now, they did not couple the 7 megahertz directly into the grid of the carrier oscillator. It couples into an RC network where the first resistor is in series with the plate coil. It's between the B plus and the B plus end of the plate coil. They have a capacitor going to ground, a bypass capacitor that integrates the function. Then they RC couple with a series capacitor and a resistor going to ground on the oscillator of the carrier oscillator. But what happens, whenever the modulation oscillator would click in, turn on, it would cut off the carrier oscillator and shut it off. Of course, etheric signals are already differentiated, so it means when you put the differentiated signal through the integrated network, it comes out in its real form in that final amplifier, that final oscillator.
Wouldn't that circuit also attenuate the instantaneous spike? In other words,
Mm-hmm.
this is de-emphasis network.
Yeah.
That's what primary oscillator. That was the intent, wasn't it? Primary oscillator in the.
We don't know what the intent was behind it. That's what it appears to be. It's an integrator, which is a de-emphasis.
Right.
A differentiator is your emphasis network. You're thinking of. See, in engineering, as a technician, you talk of de-emphasis and emphasis. In engineering, we talk of integration and differentiation. And being trained in that's what I talk of. So the etheric signal or the hyperspatial signal, the orgone is already differentiated. It can't do anything. It's 90 degrees out of phase to begin with. This integration network brings it back in phase for the transmitter to transmit it. Now also you have to keep in mind that when the tube goes from a semi-saturated mode, as it is when the carrier oscillator is oscillating the cutoff, there are other things taking place from the zero-point potential. When the tube is cut off, any of the etheric signal that's stored in the tube will be pushed out the antenna. Also, when you cut the tube off, when you go from saturation to cutoff, and from cutoff to saturation again, you're essentially ripping open the vacuum from the viewpoint of the Dirac space that he derived in the 30s. And you'll get an amplification. If these transmitters only put out about a half a watt of CW RF power, the etheric content or the non-real power was equivalent to about a 250 watt transmitter. That's how efficient these little things were.
Can you describe the phase relationship between the RF output power and the etheric power and the frequency difference between the two?
Okay, the frequency should be the same. The phase relationship...
Cosine? Would it be a cosine function?
Let's see, what would it be? It would have to be, let's see, we're coming out of the differential equation relating the baseband to the carrier frequency. I think it'd be a tangent. I think it's a tangent function.
So it would rise sharply?
Yeah.
Until the next cycle?
Mm-hmm. That tells you that sends out the etherics in bursts. In other words, when this transmitter runs, the CW part of it, when the oscillator is on, it doesn't put out much etherics. But at the point where the oscillator shuts off, it sends out a huge burst of etheric signal. That's your tangent function. I just have to think for a minute of what it would be to answer your question.
I have a totally different question. Who was in charge of this project, of the doorbusters? What department of the government?
This was under United University's Brookhaven National Lab. It was eventually turned over to the Signal Corps. Because most of these things were U.S. Army Signal Corps stuff. Even the one set up from the Weather Service was Signal Corps. So Signal Corps had ultimate charge of it.
So as you're talking about this whole system, how does that now get into what was happening in the 40s and the 80s?
Okay. Okay, let's finish this off a little. Where was I? Questions always break the train of thought.
You were describing basically the system of the doorbell.
All right, the government could not tell the public that these things were weather control devices. They were keeping that secret. How'd they guard the secret? Two ways. They first showed a few receiving stations constructed to receive these things, put out that line. The personnel that launched them would laboriously calibrate them. Thirdly, the special tube that's in the radiosondes, they would list in the tube manual as a whole bunch of baloney. Essentially, they'd be saying that only a few hours of life. That means that the ham over there picked one up, looked at the tube manual, a 7533 is only going to last a few hours, he's not going to use it. And that worked very well. As I already mentioned, I've never seen a receiver. That says they didn't use a receiver with these things. This is why this is the hard data, besides the psychic data I base that the story is correct. All right, what we're seeing here actually is in actuality the genesis of the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project was Phoenix 2. The Montauk Project is a combination of Wilhelm Reich's work in the Philadelphia experiment. It was like two separate little projects going on in Phoenix 1. You had the development of the invisibility and its human factor study. Also, you had the development of Wilhelm Reich's weather control.
So that was Phoenix 1?
Yeah, that's right? Phoenix 1, and they converged. Towards the end of the Phoenix Project, by using some of Wilhelm Reich's concepts and some of the modulation schemes gleaned from the Radiosonde Project, coupling, I know you're looking puzzled, this is what I found last week. Coupling that to the equipment that was used on the boat in the later Invisibility Project, they found out they coupled the two, you now could use this for mind control. I'm not saying mood alteration. I know government circles would rather have me say mood alteration. Here I'm calling a spade of a spade. Mind control. That's what these idiots were doing. They're not actually idiots. That's what these people were doing.
That's what the Montauk Project was?
No, the Phoenix 1.
Phoenix 1.
The end of Phoenix 1, of course, what happened? Congress, the political government heard, hey, these guys are playing with mind control. They don't want that. So they told them, hey guys, cut it out. We don't want you looking into mind control. That's a no-no. So of course, the project was stopped. It was shut down. Does anyone here think it was really shut down? No, of course not. The people that were running this project went to the military and said, hey, we got this neat little project going. We can eventually use this to influence the mind of the enemy to give up and to surrender. We need a place to do this. We got to do this undercover now. So, of course, the military, they love the idea. You know, they love something, throw a switch and the enemy puts down all their weapons and comes up hands in the air. They love this. So the military was sold a bill of goods, and the military was said, okay, you can use the old Montauk Air Force Base. It's dead, it's derelict. Also, some of the equipment you requested is on that base, the old Sage radar. So the base was shut down, everything was auctioned off, but the Sage radar was left behind. And the whole group moved from the Brookhaven Labs out to Montauk. That's Phoenix 2. Of course, they spent the first 10 years from about 1969 to about 1979 researching pure mind control. They started out by taking the output of the Sage radar, modulating it the special ways that they came up with that Reich had shown them from the weather control process, and combining that with stuff they noticed from the Philadelphia experiment work and the stealth work. And they were hitting these poor bastards with the microwave beam out of the stage transmitter direct. Stage transmitter transmitted at about 400 megahertz, 406 megahertz, I believe most of the time it was set at. Would hop around frequency a little. It would change in phase. It was pulse modulated. They used the amplidyne concept where you had many stages pulse modulated. Each one was pulse slightly different to build a form in the final stage.
Do you know the specific pulse width or frequency of pulse width?
VRF was anywhere from 10 cycles to about 750 cycles. The pulse width, depending upon how they loaded up the capacitors, the voltage could be varied anywhere from about 10 microseconds to about 75 microseconds. The center frequency was 406 megahertz, generated from a stay-low type function, which was referenced from a zero-time function.
Was there any other modulation on this? Phase modulation, frequency?
There was phase modulation, there was frequency hopping on it. Now this is as I saw it when I got on the station. I'm first trying to account what our digging and citing and digging and talking to different people told us was the genesis of this thing. Let's keep all the technical questions till later. Okay?
So let me explain out the chronology. Phoenix 2 then, it would start in 1969?
Yeah, about 69, 70, 71, somewhere in there.
Phoenix 1 went from basically from World War
48 to 68.
to 68.
Yeah. Now, essentially, the first part of the mind control project was to take an individual, such as Duncan here, stand them maybe, 250 feet away from that antenna. As I was starting to go into what the Sage radar was capable of. The Sage radar had a peak pulse power of a half a megawatt. That's in the antenna. The antenna had a gain of 30 dB. So that means you're a megawatt. It has a peak pulse power, effective radiated power of at least a gigawatt. This is nominally a gigawatt. Can you imagine what that would do to people? I think it's amazing that the people are still here today that have been hit with this. It does such things as burn out brains, function, neurological damage, and you look inside of a person's lung that had this done, it'll look like the lung is all scarred from the heat generated, and it just goes on and on with physical damage done to the body by this sort of thing. They tried this with a number of people, a few survivors, in this sort of thing.
Where they get the volunteers for this?
They were just grabbing indigenous people off the street and throwing in front of the radar beam and let's see what happens. That's the sort of nonsense that the government loves to do.
Who was in charge of the project at this time? I was covered now.
Mr. Jack Pruitt was in charge. All right.
Along with Dr. John Van Neumann.
In any particular agency?
I'm not sure what the agency was. Now, somebody got the brilliant idea, upon the urging of the different people, they got the idea, we're not sure who came up with this idea first. The signal they really want goes through the reflector. Let's take the big banana peel, that's what's called reflector, turn around 180 degrees and put the subjects directly in line with the gain horn feeding the antenna. Lo and behold, they got their results and then burned the people up. The poor bastards survived as they hit them with this signal. But they found out by varying the phase modulation, the frequency hopping, and the pulsing of the multiple stages that they could have profound effects on a person's mind.
Could you describe some of them?
I think these two gentlemen here could describe them much better than I can. But let's not go into that at this point. Yeah, why not? Let's at this point break from the technical description of the first, what I consider to be the real mind control work that they had done that was successful. Let's go into some of the effects. Mr. Bielek and Mr. Cameron, I think, can do more on this than I can.
That was the goal in mind control of this whole project.
That was the
That was the
first,
started goal.
that was the first goal.
Start.
Yeah.
And how many people more or less worked on the altogether on the base? Approximately.
That varied.
Around 30.
About 30.
Who authorized them to go on the base? Who authorized them, use of the base?
Air Force. The Air Force and the Navy.
Air Force and the Navy?
In conjunction?
No.
Air Force and Navy work together?
Yes. This was a joint project. There was both Navy personnel in it and the Air Force personnel in it.
Yeah.
We even have copies of the orders of the Air Force personnel.
And what was the cover story for the base? They must have had something.
They had none.
No?
It was a derelict base
It was abandoned. It was turned over to GSA as surplus
in 1970.
around 69, 70 when they shut down all the stage radar systems. That, in other words, there was a non-existent operation. There was no government coverage for it. There was no government payment. It was a surplus base which allegedly had nothing on it. So it was the perfect cover.
Where'd they get the funding?
It was totally private.
Yep.
Private corporations?
Essentially.
It didn't originally come from the corporations. It did in the later phases. The original money came from the Nazis, the Nazi government. In 1944, there was a
That
raid.
was Phoenix 1.
No, this
No, that wasn't
No,
Phoenix
not
1.
Phoenix 1. This is Phoenix 2 and Phoenix 3.
Really?
Yep.
In 1944, there was a American troop train that went through a French railroad tunnel carrying $10 billion in Nazi gold, which they had found. This is documented in a movie on the whole Patton scenario, in which this train was dynamited in the tunnel, killed 51 GIs, and of course Patton, who was then in Europe, decided he had to investigate this. He couldn't understand how an American troop train in the Western Territory was dynamited in a French railroad tunnel. And he was concerned about the loss of 51 GIs, and also, as it turned out, $10 billion in gold disappeared. That was $10 billion in the valuation at the then existing European prices of $20 per ounce, not 400. The gold disappeared. It turned up 10 years later in the U.S. at Montauk. This has been verified since. And that money, that gold, was used to finance the project initially, and for many years, because the value went up, as the value of gold went up, to approximately 100 billion plus. And they spent all of it and ran out of money.
That's when they tapped ITT.
And that's when they tapped ITT, who then from that point on funded it, because ITT was owned by a certain German group known as the Krupps.
Okay.
And that was again the same Nazi connection. Now in terms of personnel, many of the scientists, the civilian people and scientists there, were all ex-Nazis who came from Nazi Germany, either after the war was over with Werner von Braun, or were snuck in before the war, as was Dr. Unterman and a few others. But the whole thing was basically a civilian project run by the Nazis with the U.S. government surveillance, you might say. The intelligence community knew what was going on. The CIA monitored everything, as well as probably did well other government intelligence agencies. But the field of players, if you will, those who actually operated on the base was small, 30 to 50. And the funding was entirely private. At a very later stage, after the whole thing was over, then, I mean, after 83, there was some investigation started by a certain senator from Arizona, I think his name was Goldwater. They couldn't find any trace of government funding, no government oversight committees, no payments of money of any kind, no appropriations, nothing. They went absolutely bananas trying to figure out how a project of that magnitude and that scope could have been funded when there was no government money.
Thing the senator would like to know.
That's right. Pruitt was Air Force. He was an Air Force colonel, I believe.
How'd you get Air Force personnel assigned to a derelict base?
Right. Pruitt had his office in the Pentagon. I found that out through other connections. And he was the basic director through the whole of Phoenix 2 and 3, though actually they had two directors. They had the so-called psychic metaphysical director, which was Pruitt, and they had a hardware electronics director, who was originally Dr. Van Neumann. And after he left, Dr. Unterman took over, Hermann C. Unterman from Germany. And they also had an electronics expert who, through most of the period of time, as a Dr. Matthew Lee Zarrett, who came in with Werner von Braun in 46. In fact, I understudied the man, strangely enough, in New York College of Engineering in Newark, New Jersey. He was my college prof there. And I didn't know a thing about his connections or his background or that he had come from Germany. Lo and behold, he turns up there. Private funding all the way until, well, actually 100%.
78?
Until it was over, there was still private funding through ITT.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Government never spent a cent on it.
The gold, I think, ran until about 78.
Approximately
He
that.
got heavily in at about 78, 79.
One of the reasons why they ran out of money was the fact that there was eventually not one base, but 25.
Yeah.
All SAGE bases, 25 of them were utilized for the same program. They were running in parallel. And eventually they shut down until the end, I believe. That is the info we have, is there were only 3 still operational, and they were tied together by satellite.
But they shut down quite late in the program.
Yeah. They shut
How
down.
recently were they operating? When did they finally shut down?
The last of them shut down August 12, 1983.
That was Montauk.
And that was Montauk, the final. When it went down, it shut the other 2 or whatever that were still operating with it via satellite down. So
Well, when Montauk went down, they had to go down because that's where they got their zero sign.
correct.
Was from Montauk.
Yeah. Montauk was the key station.
Yeah. So they automatically went down. All right, so
Well, you asked, or the question was asked, what about some of the mind effects?
yeah.
I'll try to answer that and say, from what I recall of the program, because I was part of it also, as well as Duncan,
As an officer or a
civilian.
civilian who was used?
Used is the correct term, very definitely used.
You were subjected to the,
Well, yes, I was subjected to the, let's say, the mind control field, not as I initially went in the program, because they wanted me at one point for my psychic and metaphysical abilities, and you don't subject a person who is a sensitive to those kind of fields, because they know they will wipe them out, or alter them so drastically that they're useless. But they assigned me to a particular part of the program involving the indoctrination of the younger recruits, we'll put it that way. And after, let us say, one of the first attempts at indoctrination, which turned out to be a total disaster, I said, there's no way I will have any part of this program, no matter what you do or say. So they said, oh, yes, you will. And I said, well, no, I won't. So they put me in front of this roasting oven, if you will, the mind beam, and it did do damage to me. And finally somebody else said, shut it off. He isn't going to give in to it. I suffered some damage, but not severe damage as some others did. And it did affect me to some extent. Duncan was affected much more heavily for other reasons. But nevertheless, the effects were, in some cases, totally disastrous. They burned brains out and the people just dropped dead. Now, neither of us were among those category, but there were other recruits, young kids they picked up, you might say, off the streets, wherever they could find them. The basic age bracket was between 12 and 16.
So that's where a lot of the disappearing
Yes.
kids
10,000 we estimate went to Montauk. The total number would be about 250,000 with the 25 stations estimated. What the actual final directives, what the final thrust of the program was in terms of these kids, we had never come up with the answers. They wanted them fully programmed for something, and we've never found out what. And eventually they disappeared off the station. They were sent to various locations and places. But they were initially subjected to one form of programming, and then later on it changed into a somewhat more humane, a somewhat faster and less obtrusive form of programming and conditioning using the electronic techniques. The original was Reichian and was more physical and was less sophisticated. The later programs, after they worked out the techniques to use of computers, electronic programming, and the electronic use of the Reichian techniques, and it became very fast, very quick, and usually took very well with no side effects. And these kids would never know what happened to them. They ship them back to where they got them, or to wherever they wanted them to go. They would know the better.
are you aware of the names or identities or the present locations of any of the individuals?
I've run into a number of people over the years, let's say in the last 3 years, since I've become aware of the program and the fact that I was part of it. There is a very specific field identity pattern you can detect. If you're sensitive enough to read human auras, you can spot a person that's been through the Montauk program 5 miles away. Their auras are very distinctive in the way that they have been altered. You can tell them immediately if you know what you're looking for. And I've spotted many. I would say over a dozen. Mostly in the Long Island, New York area.
Wasn't, when Newman was officially dead, right? Well,
Correct. Officially he was dead, but he was very much alive throughout this entire program, all the way through '83 and for quite some time after that, up into this year, through this year.
Oh, he's finally passed away?
I don't know exactly the whole story of what's happened to von Neumann since, because he ran into a problem with the government, and he ran into two problems. One, he suffered a personality split himself about 1977. Whether it's because of some of the experiments he was on or the strain, we don't know. But he resigned as director. He said he was no longer fit. The government wouldn't leave him alone. They wouldn't let him leave. They said, you will remain as a consultant, which was agreeable to him, to the balance of the program. Because there were other reasons why he had to be there, which goes back into the whole Philadelphia experiment. But he remained on as a consultant. At the end, he told them, he says, when this program is over, he says, I'm not going to work for the government again ever, no matter what you say. He says, I'm through with you. He says, I want no further part of any of your government operations. And he retired to his little farm and led a relatively peaceful life for a period of time until he was harassed again in the last year, year and a half. But that's not part of the Montauk thing.
Right.
Was he living under another name then?
Living under a pseudonym.
When did he officially die?
1957.
57.
That's the official death date.
What happened to the other scientists? Pruitt and, what was it, Interman?
Pruitt was there until '83.
Yeah.
And then he went and worked in different corporations and disappeared.
Washington was seen to turn up. You ran into him.
Yeah, a couple of times, that was it.
Yeah, and then he just...
Other than ran for the hills, I think.
Most of them did. They ran for the hills.
Well, let's continue on the description of the Phoenix project.
I just have one more question about the Montauk. Were any of the subjects given psychotropic substances? LSD?
I don't know.
We don't believe so.
My gut feeling is no.
In conjunction with the
I don't believe they were.
No, they used other drugs. They had one drug that would be used in connection with the Reich programming. It would make them more receptive.
This was not.
Do you know the name of the drug, the chemical name, or a generic name?
No, I don't.
I have no knowledge of
Can
that
you
at all.
describe any of the effects of that alone, or in conjunction with the...
Okay, the effects would make you horny as hell.
Uh-huh.
That's essentially what it would do. It would make you very sexually active.
Also euphoric at the same time.
Yeah.
And euphoric?
Well, that would go along with it.
Right.
Yeah.
What was the purpose of being euphoric?
All right. Essentially, I don't.
Or they get the chair from the aliens?
But we're not sure whether they got the chair itself from the aliens, but
Did
the
they get a
technology
prototype from
base
the aliens?
came. Yes, the prototype came from the aliens.
Willingly or from a crashed saucer?
Maybe.
Exchange of sorts.
We don't know.
Also, I had another question on what you were describing before. Could this experience that is becoming very common of the UFO abduction could have been programmed by the government under this mind control?
Sure, it could be. Not all of it is, but some of it probably is.
Some of it.
All right. But they got this chair from the aliens, or from some connection. Another associate of ours was on the station managing money, and he actually went out and bought this chair from somebody. He hasn't been able to dig out yet who. So, what they essentially did is they took this chair, they made one computer to interface the chair itself to stay in the digital codes, and then another computer to interface it to a special computer to the transmitter, and then the transmitter. What they actually ended up with, in essence, was a mind amplifier. Duncan here, his major responsibility on the station, he was one of the selected individuals. He had been through a lot of psychic training by the government to sit in that chair and generate thought form. The idea they had is, okay, they can transmit the signature digitally, that worked very well. They could put the person in the orgasmic state digitally, that worked very well, but they wanted a human being to generate the actual thought form, the details of what they wanted done.
From the chair.
From the chair, yeah. In other words, they would put into Duncan's mind, when he's in a trance, what they want him to think of, what they want him to think of that he's doing. The chair would pick it up. After the data was sent that would turn on the target individual, his thoughts are channeled directly through the transmitter to the individual. It worked, but it didn't work. It worked very well, extremely well, but they found another capability. Let's say they would target Phil at Tuesday, 4 a.m. when he's asleep. And I actually discovered that Phil was actually hit 2 weeks later. What did they discover? They did not block the time in of the person. What did they get? They got a time machine. Next bright idea they got was, okay, let's tell Duncan to think of a vortex connecting 1981 to 1947. He would do is what happened. They got a vortex going from 1981 to 1947. You can walk through. Great. Now,
Duncan had to be, you had to be really good to be able to visualize. And
Duncan's very good at
you have to
visualizing.
be really master, I would think.
So let's not go into that at this point.
Well, you're talking about it at this point, that's why I bring it up.
And master is a word in the dictionary.
It's the word I use. And if you want.
Well, we're talking of earlier capabilities, not today. He was also raped over as well. But, you know, what they discovered is, okay, the real time he thought of it, what they discovered is they recorded it, put the tape on the computer, did the same thing again. So now, they had a tape that would open a vortex. And they started going back in time, they started going ahead in time, they actually got the time machine. That's the last phase of the Phoenix project, was the time machine. Of
And
course,
they could control that time factor to where they wanted to
Yep.
go.
whatever he thought of, or other people like him. He wasn't the only one, they had to have at least 5 backups.
That was still phase 2.
That was phase 3.
Phase 3.
Yeah, was the time machine.
Now, that time machine, what do you know the date?
That got going about 79 to 80. They got that operational. Of course,
Fully operational?
yeah, about
I mean,
79
to
to 80.
transmit both matter and
Thought
signals.
Yeah, right. They had this, you could walk through the vortex. You could walk in 1981 and come out in 47.
Who, Cameron would, or the one?
Anyone.
Can you explain
I
again
don't-
how this was first developed? Because I
Who was the mechanism behind it?
First of all, this transmitter was so freaking powerful. This transmitter had enough power to warp space and time, go through Bierman's equations. There's more than enough power to do it. He had the capability of thinking of the vortex function that they couldn't synthesize. They didn't know how to synthesize that vortex function, but he knew. Innately, inherently, he knew how to do it.
Can it be mechanically synthesized right now?
I'm sure they got the tapes. I'm sure they got the tapes. Now, also, things they did was they would have the subject that's sitting in the chair think of a creature. And that creature would precipitate itself. They would have the subject think, there's a car coming up the road, stop the car. The car would stop, there'd be no electrical activity in it. They would have the subject in the chair think of change the direction of the fish, and the fish would do this sort of thing. They would have the subject think all the animals on Montauk Point are going to charge into the town. There's records of that even to this day, of all animal life coming off the point charging into the town. There'd be, you talk to the local kids, now they're young adults out at Montauk, that lived out at Montauk, you'll find out there's rumors of kids hearing big things stomping around the woods on the point. That's what came out of somebody's mind, precipitated through this huge mind amplifier. They almost had the power of creation. They could almost create a being. The problem they had is the being only stayed as long as the transmitter was on. Flip the switch. The being stopped all its mobility and faded back into hyperspace. But that's how powerful this thing was. This thing, you're talking gigawatts in the etheric power, probably many, many terawatts. You're talking astronomical etheric power. Because they're using multiple pulse modulated amplifiers on top of pulse modulated amplifiers, opening different windows in the drive of this amp to that amp, and you can encode all sorts of zero-point functions as you go through what they call the amplidyne function. So the amplidyne is essentially a zero-point amplifier. So by the time they started pulsing, the 100-watt stayed. By the time they got out to the half a gigawatt output, the etheric power was up in the sky. This thing was tremendous. This transmitter, it took at times 2 generators supplying a megawatt each to run this thing. They were pumping 2 megawatts into this whole building, which you'll see pictures of. But, you know, I don't think I can overstate how much power, as far as we're concerned in this room, it's astronomical power this thing had. This thing literally had, if the person who was sitting in the chair thought of a time warp and a vortex, that vortex will form.
Excuse me, does this have any military applications that you're aware of? Silly question.
I can think of thousands.
And is that why Eastern Europe's almost free today? Because the Russians are simply scared of this? I don't know.
Who knows? There's also other thoughts that other outside groups are saying to the Earth government use straighten up or ship out. Who knows?
You said people could walk through this time vortex.
Yes, right.
Did you ever walk through the time vortex?
No comment.
Do you know anybody that did?
Oh, yes.
Could you describe at least the experience, or?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I did more than once, and it's weird, to say the least. The recollection is that you.
First of all, how is it formed? Just at the beginning, before it's created, what do you see? Before it's created?
Before it's created, you see nothing but the building or the area that you're in.
You're in a chair or in
No.
open space?
No, what they finally ended up doing was they took whatever Duncan or his alternates would generate, they put it on tape.
Okay.
Now, it could generate it inside the underground area, or it could generate the...
From anywhere to anywhere.
Or generate it outside. It can be from any particular point where they chose to generate the origin, and it would go to the terminal point.
It can happen while you were...
Where?
The terminal point would be wherever they chose it to be.
And you could be driving a car. What would happen?
You probably...
I mean, what would happen if you were driving a car?
Your car would go through it.
If your car went into the entrance of it, yes, the car would go through and come out at the other end where it was. It could be 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 years in the future or the past.
You would actually...
Let's go to that other time to describe
Whatever went in the beginning, the entrance would come out the other end.
I've run computer modeling.
I'm sorry?
Could the car be spatially dislocated? Could it be somewhere else in the universe?
Sure could.
Yes.
I've run computer modeling based upon calculations I've learned from the radio sounds and such, and the vortex could have a diameter of 5 miles. Could be a 5-mile opening, or of course they could bring it down to
Long Island.
no.
So what was it like, Al? You were saying.
It's like looking into the entrance of a peculiar spiral tunnel which was lit all the way down. You would start to walk into this thing, and then suddenly you'd be pulled down it. You would more or less be projected. You didn't walk through it as such. You were more or less propelled through it.
You walked into it.
You walked into it, correct, start. Then you were propelled down the thing like some force grabbed you and pulled you through, and you come out the other end, wherever it is. It could be far in the past, it could be in the future, it could be very close by, and it could definitely be another place, physically, other than the point where you started and usually was.
wherever whatever point in space and time the transmitter was set to transmit to.
Emphasize space and time
Right.
because it could be anywhere in the universe.
Did you go back or forward in time?
Either one.
Either way.
Were you physically there? Could you interact with other things?
Yes.
Yes.
You could take remnants back with you. You could take a sense, like for example, if you projected yourself to go to another planet, you could bring something back with you.
Sure,
Yes, you could.
Has
So
that
if you
been
could
done?
live on the other planet,
Yeah, right. I can't answer that for certain, but I would say probably.
Have you ever personally brought anything back from another time, either the past or a future?
Yes.
Was it of terrestrial origin or?
Yes, in this case it was terrestrial origin. It was a Life magazine from the year 1983. You take it back to 1943, but that's part of the Philadelphia story.
that still continue in the Phoenix project yet.
Right.
How did
You
you
know,
get
you guys asked the question of what it was
Okay,
like.
the description of the vortex, please continue.
Well, the description was it was like a tunnel, coruscating corkscrew, sort of lit, sort of looked like the walls were,
Solid or moving?
they were solid, but they were fluted. It was not a solid bore through rock, as you would
Right.
think. It was a fluted sort of structure. And you would go down this, and you would be propelled down this tube, as it were, this tunnel, which was not straight. It was corkscrew. And it would not go in a straight line either. It would take some very strange turns, which you could not explain. But it did take turns, and you would come out at the other end, wherever you were supposed to come out, and meet somebody or do something at the other point.
Did
And
you have like a mission?
yes. Then you would return. Then whatever you were doing was completed, the tunnel would reopen for you, and you go in the other direction. You walk back in it, go back to where you came from.
Exact reverse of what happened when you went there.
If someone switched off the tower, would you be able to get back?
No,
No, you'd be
No,
lost in
you'd be
time
stuck
and
there.
space.
And they never get back.
you would not get back.
People were lost at
That's what I was
Montauk.
asking.
People were lost. I've heard of that.
Was everyone who went through one of these programmees?
Possibly?
Possibly, we don't know of all of those people, those young kids who were programmed, what the final intent was. We only have a little glimmering of part of it now, and this is in the last week or two, and it's very incomplete. It's been a mystery to us for a long time. What was the end goal of all of these kids being programmed? What did they want to do with them? And 10,000 there and all the other stations? There had to be a reason.
When you said people were lost, does that mean that if the machine was turned off, instant disintegration or just abandoned in that time period?
It would depend on which happened first. In other words, if they went down the tunnel and got to their termination,
They were fine.
they were fine. And if the tunnel was turned off and they couldn't get it refocused to that area in time, and the person was lost there, they were abandoned, so to speak, and
They were
trapped
floating
in that
in
time or
hyperspace.
location. If the tunnel disintegrated while they were in transit, they were lost.
And if they
Disintegrated.
were abandoned in time,
Yeah, they could be abandoned.
and
in
this is
time.
going to be a sort of a philosophical question,
Yeah.
wouldn't they be angry and do something really wild to alter the future?
Depends on where they were abandoned.
Well, they did not abandon people in time. The problem was that the transmitter would glitch, and as you were in transit from time 1 to time 2, the tunnel would collapse,
Yeah.
and you're lost.
You might be lost intact, you might be lost in a form of being atomically disintegrated, in which case you were totally lost.
But the philosophical question is valid. I mean, where you would go back in the past, could you alter the future?
Sure you can.
Of course.
Has it been done?
Has it been done? That's
Yes, there
That's the reason we exist in a time loop right now. What we do from one end to what Montauk penetrated in the past to what we do to where Montauk penetrated in the future is now fixed. Because it's fed back on itself. It's now a fixed,
It is fixed.
it's fixed right now. Has to be because of that. It has to be fixed.
You went forward in time?
Went forward and backwards both. One of the first things they did with the raw recruits, as it were, after they passed the initial tests and examination to see if they were suitable for the program, and they were found suitable. I don't know what the reason was, but I do remember that one of the things they did was they sent every raw recruit forward into the future to a year around 6030 AD, and it was always to the same point. someplace in the future in the middle of an abandoned city with a square where there was still a statue in solid gold. And they would ask them to look at this and see what they saw after they came back. And they interpreted whatever the individual saw, for what purpose I'm not sure, but this was one instance where apparently all recruits were sent to this point in time to see what they saw, and whether they were expecting to find a different answer, and from person to person, I don't know.
Were they equipped with protective suits or equipment?
No, ordinary clothes.
That's if they were going to a friendly environment.
Yeah.
Well, if you're sending someone into the future, you know, into a possible nuclear...
Well, they first would look into the future through the vortex. They could sample the air, they could sample everything on this side.
Now, were there different potential futures that people could be sent to?
No, because once you make the first connection into the future, it's fixed. Anything from that future point back is fixed.
But what I'm saying is, are there different
That's the reason the
futures that
government
they could go into?
The first projection, yes, there's multiple different futures. But once the first projection is made into the future, from that point back, from the future, let's say they project from 83 to the future.
Okay.
From this point back, it's not fixed. Because the fact that he went from here to here has not fixed the current
Even
flow.
after they turn off the machine
Yeah.
or whatever?
Because the fact they turned off the machine does not alter that he was here and then came back.
Right.
Then that sounds like you couldn't change the present by sending someone to the past.
Yes,
By
you
Very
can.
definitely.
You can, yes.
Yes. You can
Exactly.
change the present by sending someone into the future, too, for that matter.
Yep.
And
How do you change the present by sending someone into the future?
under certain conditions, you can.
Well, it's a closed loop, you can.
Cameron, had you gone into the future at all?
Yes. I've seen the horse, which Al speaks of. It's
Oh, the golden statue.
the golden statue. It's a horse with no rider. It's an abandoned city. It's sort of like a dream state. It's a very peculiar, where there is virtually no dynamic ability ongoing. It's a very stationary, almost frozen state.
No markings on the statue, no, did you know what it was, what it referred
I don't think I can say.
Beyond that, you want to make any statements about anything else in the future that might interest people, or that you could talk about without doing damage?
Only in the fact that when there is a function that is presented ahead, there are increments that, from that particular point in time, which was propagated from, there will be effect back to the initial point of reference. That is the nature of the beast, as Preston spoke. Once you have a reference,
Once you close the loop.
whether it be ahead or behind, that doesn't necessarily mean that that particular point in the future cannot be changed. Everything and nothing is possible. So,
If there
along
were
those lines-
changes that were going on in the future, you can't really do much about that yourself, could you?
Oh, that's correct.
Could it be just like a projection or something, or not the real future? Some kind of
Oh, if
condition
something-
thing on the mind?
To answer the question, depending upon what realism set of functions, however they be real or manifested or surrealistic, depending what function and what time line, there are many timelines and functions of realism. Depending where you're going and where you attribute the point of reference, that determines how it will affect, as let's say you and I here, as to us here directly. The realistic point, how much that, let's say it's a manifested realism, that could have some effect here, but not that dramatically. As something, let's say, us sitting here 20 years ahead, that is in our space and framework and function of time, so that would affect us more dramatically than just something that was sort of created.
Okay, say that one psychic sets up a vortex to the future and we use that and then we shut that one down. If another psychic sets up a vortex to the future, will it go to the same future or can it go to a different one?
They go to wherever the function is generated to go to.
That's correct.
Okay.
There had to be people who were really controlling this very exactly and specifically.
Oh, yeah.
Surely.
Very definitely.
Very much.
But what I'm saying is it'll go to a different place in time, but will it be on the same timeline, the same reality as the first psychic's vortex?
As long as it's before the most furthest point they projected
Okay.
ahead, yes, it will be. In fact, the government is using that today to, the existing time machines still flow in the Montauk line.
Okay, once they have done that, can we go back in time and change the past to change the present, and then the future will be changed?
You already did it. Let the loop flow. Everybody does automatically what they're supposed to do. If
The
you
loop has
from
been
the
closed
future-
once you've gone to the future.
Right.
So we don't have to worry about our present being changed now,
No, it can't be changed.
because we've already looped to the future through it.
And through the past.
Right.
If, let's say this is 83, let's say this is year 1, this is year 1000. And you go from 83 to year 1, from 83 to year, 2000. Anywhere between 2000 and 1, now you set it back on itself. That means
So it's locked.
whatever the people do in here, they're going to do forever and ever. We're in an endless do loop in the computer right now.
What is the furthest forward anyone has traveled that you know of?
10,000.
So that's all locked through 10,000.
Unless the
Can you
vortex
describe
can be broken.
can you describe any recollection of anybody you know that has traveled that far into the future?
Nobody has ever gotten that far into the future and gotten into a real, almost like a running life situation, so we don't know what it is. As Duncan described, it always appears to be like a dream state where they hardly ever encounter any other people.
What about, all right, as far as going into the future and encountering people on Earth, okay, how far ahead is that?
Near term.
I believe they've gone about 10,000 years ahead.
But you still...
And encountered people.
No, what I'm saying is encountered something other than a dreamlike or a sublimated state. Interacted with people.
How far can you go and get a tangible, real future? Or can you do that?
No one's gotten a tangible, real future beyond 2012.
2012, 13, 14.
Somewhere in there.
Depends.
Does that indicate that maybe things have changed so radically at that time that there isn't anything else to see?
Something's happened.
There is a very, very abrupt wall there with nothing on the other side.
So the prophecies speak of the earth changes at those times.
Curious, isn't it?
Did you, in your travels, did you ever, Cameron, learn so much that for yourself it really was of value to you and not so much to others, but...
Okay, you have to realize the intelligence at the particular time. I now can sit here and speak of this in a matter-of-fact term. When the project having to do with out in Montauk was ongoing, I was very much not myself. In control of other, control of other people, functions, forms.
they control your...
I beg your pardon, that's
Right.
correct. In the control of, I should say. So I gained only what...
They wanted you to...
That's correct, basically.
Did they also deprive you of sleep and food and things like this to make you more malleable? Or?
No.
Simply...
Basically, that's sort of corny.
Right.
I don't mean to demean your question,
No, I understand.
but it was very elementary in the
Right.
procedures that they did.
How
have.
long were you permitted to stay in the time period? Was it
Hours.
hours, minutes, seconds?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
If you were put into a time period, forward or back, okay?
How much
How
on our
long
clock?
were you permitted to stay there? How long would the vortex stay open?
As long as they ran the transmitter.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I mean, what was the mean time that someone would stay in the future? Minutes, seconds, days, hours?
I can't answer that. The
Hard to
question
say.
is not answerable, considering
I mean, in
the
your
format for which
perception
we're
of
traveling.
time, in your perception of
No,
time.
not
There is no
this perception.
there is no such
The people who were running it.
consideration of perception of time during that period. It's
There
very...
It wasn't a deal where they were told you got an hour to do the job, you gotta be back in an hour.
Does that mean that when you went back, for the people on this side, it appeared you just went in and came right back out?
Yeah.
So,
Basically.
So you basically left and returned at the same time, no matter how much time you spent, some went out?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's true.
yeah.
So there were a few points where the thing glitched and you might have returned an hour later.
But
But it wasn't meant to.
basically, when you deal in the avenues of what Preston and Al call hyperspace, there is no such thing as time per se. It's in causality.
Right,
In theory and in function, you can return before you can start.
right.
When they return you before you started, you don't remember what happened.
That
That's
Can happen,
one of
it
the
did
ways
happen.
they erase memories.
They did that intentionally, didn't they?
Yeah. They have you do a job, go through the job, and then they return you to maybe milliseconds before you started. At that point, it becomes an isolated loop. You're detached from it. You can't even attach the Akashic record from that.
Incredible.
What was the shortest period of time that you know of someone traveling forward in time? Enough time to see himself coming through the vortex?
Okay, you're again asking Preston.
Okay.
He has information of such. I don't mean to demean your question.
I know that he has a lot of general information. You have specific information. So if anyone wants to answer that, the shortest period of time, like for example, if there's seconds between the time you enter the vortex and the time you arrive, could you put yourself in the future? For example, could you put yourself in the future 20 seconds or a minute or 3 minutes and meet yourself?
Okay, what he's getting at is, can you project yourself, let's say, 2 hours in the future and then meet yourself 2 hours in the future?
Right.
Yes, you can. It's very dangerous.
Has it been done, to your knowledge?
No, it has not been done because when you walk through the tunnel, the way the tunnel was created, the person that walked in one end was out of phase with the person that walked out of the other end, and if he met himself, poof, was gone.
Like matter and antimatter?
Yeah,
Very much.
like, but not quite like that.
Okay, just to add to something, what Preston says, in theory, this is what happens. Indeed, it did happen.
It did happen.
Oh, sure. As a matter of test run and procedure.
And the person did not survive.
Oh, sure, it was literally just blown apart.
Yeah.
As if incinerated.
That's when they
To be
found
recorded.
out that the transmitter did the phase reversal number. Still, they don't understand exactly what phase reversal it is. It's not normal phase reversal. It's
Cameron, if at a time you went into the future and you were in a point of danger, let's say in some situation you didn't expect, did you ever come across that sort of thing where, like that situation, right in the moment, whatever it was?
Well, on a metaphysical
Right.
basis and theory, since I was educated in that sense, when you start moving through space and time, it is of necessity to start looking around and seeing what's going on other than supposedly straight ahead. All different functions and violations of all sorts of things that go on.
It's breaking all sorts of laws,
Really?
Oh, sure.
physical laws.
To answer your question directly, though, I have passed myself in view, not made a connection of sort. You just don't do that.
Have you ever given anything to protect you against anything you would come across if it was a life and death situation? As people go into the jungles and they have weapons, let's say, or you're on a mission, you have weapons, but you would go into the future. If you met something and you were really in danger, what would you do if you didn't have a weapon of some sort? So did you carry such a thing?
Or would you have immediate access to the corridor?
Okay, I think I can answer that.
I have no
Curious about it.
information on that.
I think I could answer that. First of all, they could design the vortex so it would follow him, and they could essentially view what's happening to him in the future.
Oh, they were viewing you
That
also.
means, this I do remember, I'm sorry, this I know happened, that they could follow the person in the future or the past. Anything dangerous start to happen, they just bring them back automatically. It was like a mission control where there was a group of people watching what went on, and they were able to talk to him. He could talk back to them. You know, they had set up so that when they speak into a mic on the station, he could hear it. Because they hear what he says through the speakers on the station, and that whole monitoring setup operational, and they also had the capability with the transmitter to run the vortex right over him and pull him back without him walking in it. They walk the vortex to him. If he started to encounter anything dangerous, zoop, he'd be pulled back and he'd be out of it.
Excuse me, put me down if I'm jumping ahead, but was the vortex, as many of us have read, first opened with the Philadelphia experiment in 1942-43?
Yes.
So are you going to be talking about that later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we will be. As soon as we can get over this hurdle here.
Right.
It's a fascinating hurdle, you know?
That's a good sized one.
Very fascinating.
Also, because I remember hearing that lecture when you first talked about it, the circumstances by which this project was canceled in such a...
But we haven't got that far.
panic situation.
Yeah.
No, I know.
We haven't got that far. Let's at this point continue. We can...
Well, I got a related question real quickly. When you went into the future and saw the horse, was that by any chance something to scare you into agreeing to do what they wanted to prevent something, or?
It was more of a view, just to consider indeed what was there and critique.
Yep.
So they really wanted to know something.
A reference point.
Yeah, it's a test.
It was a test, basically.
We're all getting the same answer.
They wanted to see if everybody came back with basically the same view, the same information. Test your powers of observation, whatever.
Okay.
What did you see? Describe it in detail. Not only the horse, but the surrounding city that was in ruins. Well, do you have any ideas why? Did you see anybody there? Did you see anything else?
So,
Et cetera, et cetera.
so when you would go through the vortex, if you were to go through right now, you'd disappear from this spot?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Very definitely.
You wouldn't be here.
I got you.
You'd just be on the viewers.
Right.
All right. Let's continue.
So one more question. Could this system of the vortex without the technological trappings, but being something similar to how Nostradamus or the prophets or whatever were supposed to see the future?
Who knows?
I mean,
That's
speculating.
Totally unknown.
I assume movies were sometimes taken in the past.
The movies can be made right off the viewers.
Oh, really?
They could do that off the viewer?
Sure.
Like,
The viewer was a video signaling. You put the viewer right onto a videotape machine.
Wow.
what kind of files must they have somewhere on all?
You must have
Yes,
some great home
good
movies.
question. What kind of
Somebody
file?
already had movies. All right.
Home movies.
Home movies, yeah, that's a good one.
What a file of home movies.
Sounds like a title for a sci-fi movie about this.
And question of the year, do you have any of these tapes? No.
No. They were closely guarded. I know the tapes were made because I saw them, but they were closely guarded.
You saw the tape?
Well, I have to admit, I think I have to admit at this point, I was there too. I was the guy that built the transmitter. You know, rebuilt the transmitter. See, they did the number on me where I would go to work. And then I would be taken out to Montauk. I'd do 10 hours work, then they would bring me back, run me back to millisecond or so before I left, and I never knew what happened. I had to reference to that period to pull my memories. And I have done it. I pulled most of the memories. That's how I can talk of the viewer. I was the one that designed and built the viewer. Of course, I had tremendous facilities behind me to do it. I
And
can't do
staff
it.
and information and computers,
No, not like my garage.
No.
educators.
To continue, all right, they got the working time portal, the working time vortex. Somebody on the station realized, hey, we're headed for a mess. We gotta stop this thing. Just like in the old movie Donovan's Brain. What was done was in one of the chair subjects' minds, there was a little thought implanted that you're going to pull a monster out of the id, a monster out of the subconscious, and transmit it through the transmitter on site. And the person went in, lay down in the chair, went into this thing, and there was no one else in the room, which happened every once in a blue moon, but it did happen. This person snuck in and said, okay, the time is now, whatever the key word was. At that point, the person unleashed through the transmitter the form, and the transmitter precipitated this huge, big, black, hairy thing that was hungry. It ate everything in sight, buildings, people, ground, and they went into a panic when they couldn't control this thing and stop it. Pruitt says, shut the transmitter off. They go down to the power station, shut down generators, throw the switches, freaking thing didn't stop. Kept going. Was still hungry and still eating.
This was on the base?
Yeah, on the base.
Actually, we're eating people and
Yep.
machinery and everything.
Yep.
And smashing everything it could get
Building.
in the site.
How big was the building?
About 30 foot tall.
Storage buried.
Solid or?
Yeah, it was solid, sure. The transmitter had the capability to precipitate the
Right.
thing. We knew at that point the transmitter could do it. And finally, Pruitt said, okay, he's got to go up and cut the wires to come out of the ground into the radar building. They cut those wires. We figured maybe there was wires got miswired on the ground and was getting power from somewhere besides the generator's house. Cut the wires, freaking thing still continued to work. And then they kept going, they cut the wires inside the building, freaking thing continued to work. No one could walk upstairs at that point. The energy was so heavy, you couldn't even get above the first floor. They tried cutting everything to the first floor to shut this freaking thing off. Now, to try to go ahead a little, what had actually happened is they had made a connection on that day that Junior was released with the Philadelphia experiment. Somebody had to go shut off the Philadelphia generators. I will go into that. That's his field of expertise. When the generators are shut off on the Eldridge, then Pruitt was able to take settling torches and go up and cut the transmitter apart in Montauk. You go out to this day, you'll see where there's settling torch marks and everything on the equipment.
You can go on the base now?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, it's wide open.
And this was in 83.
Yeah, 83, August 12, 1983. Okay, at that point, anyone that was left, they dragged into a site that we won't disclose at this point and did the total brainwashing number on. So you didn't remember a thing. All of us sitting here were brainwashed, so we didn't remember anything. Except that he found his way to my place. And that's when the deprogramming started.
You're one of the two you spoke of on the tape? Or somebody who came to your house to tell you about what happened? Or what you spoke to, Cameron or Al?
Cameron.
Okay.
How did you happen to go to Preston's place, Cameron? Instinct?
Directed or instinct or perchance, it's hard to say. There's a story that goes along with it. It's sort of long and bulky, but somehow it comes up that indeed I was directed to, still under influence and command, so to speak, to disrupt Preston and his work.
At that point, they were getting worried about me because I was starting to stumble into Montauk in real life.
You were remembering things, or you were just, you had occasion to go
over
there?
the years, one of the problems with this thing that they set up, although you don't remember any of the work you did, little bits and pieces of it filter through. I developed a huge interest in esoteric technology, psychotronics, psychic activity. I was researching this to the nth degree. I had a team of psychics working with me, and we were trying to figure out what was the energy form and all this stuff. I knew in the mid-70s there was a source of psychic interference here on Long Island. And after a couple of years, I was able to trace it right out to Montauk. So I had my eye on Montauk for years. But I could never get on there. The security was thick. Although it was a derelict base, there was security guards all over the place. And all I know is a friend of mine from out east called me and said, Preston, the old Montauk Air Base is wide open. And when do you want to go look? I said, tomorrow. And I was out there that morning with my friend. We walked all around. First thing, when military pulls out of a base, what do? They clean everything up, they take everything with them. There was junk strewn over the whole base. There were files dumped out of a file cabinet just filling one room in the big building, the floor of one room. Equipment was still left. Power was still on in sections of the base. You had to switch in the lights to come on.
People gone?
They just fled, zoom.
Because they were scared of this creature?
Yeah.
Fled in utter panic.
Right.
What happened to the monster?
That's your responsible military for you.
When the transmitter was shut off, was finally cut apart, the monster stopped animation and over a period of days just faded back into hyperspace. See, all these these things were active, tunnels, creations, whatever, as long as that transmitter was functioning. Either it got power from the site or it got power from the Eldridge. It didn't matter where it got its power from.
What happened to this person who created this id or whatever? Is that one of you?
I don't know if these guys want to say.
Well, information, there is a photograph that was taken just in routine basis out in Montauk that was presented in the first lecture, Preston in 85, 6, Chicago wasn't it? USPA conference. There were random photos taken, and one of the gentlemen from SITU, is that correct?
Yeah.
What does this stand for?
Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained.
He looked at a photograph and said there's something there unusual. There was a blow-up of it, and there was a sort of what's been categorized as sort of like a Bigfoot. What I see on that is myself, is an image of myself riding the back of it.
And that identifies where it came from.
How much, I'm very startled with the photograph for sure. It does seem to have a connection with me, even though I try to discredit it.
Is this in one of these slides? One of these ones?
Oh, no.
It's there.
It's in the collection of slides.
Ah,
It's in the right side. Very small.
So it's still like a faint image or something?
Right, the faint image.
So this would be very similar to the quote-unquote it or the shadow or whatever
yeah.
psychological technique you want to use.
Yeah, just an add-on here. Preston spoke of a 30-foot type creature. There are a number of images associated. 30 feet is by all means could very well be correct. 9 feet, 10 feet, depending which image is considered.
Also, perhaps how scared the individual was who saw it.
Well, some
these
of the
tales
marks.
grow.
Some of the marks on the buildings are up quite high. It
Yeah.
had to be like 30,
There's
it
at
had to be
least
at least
15.
25 feet
I would say
On the
at least
outside or
15,
inside?
probably more.
outside.
So
There's still
when
this-
it got outside and it was attacking the building from the
Oh,
outside?
yeah.
All right.
It was rolling free.
Was it like a monkey type big, like King Kong?
It was very similar in appearance to one of the Bigfoot,
Bigfoot.
which you showed them. I've seen pictures of, I'm sure, at various times and
But
places.
huge.
But huge. Instead of being 7 foot, it was perhaps closer to 30. My original impression was, when I first went on the base, it was perhaps 30 foot high.
Now, to the best of your knowledge, how was this creature created again? Was there some kind of someone decided
was
this
him.
was to be created?
Yeah, some person, we're not sure who it was at this point, felt like the rest of us here that this was going too far, it was getting dangerous, and there was going to be problems in the future. It had to be brought to a stop. The project had to be crashed. And the most effective way to crash it was to make something hungry that would cause them to panic. Throw them into a panic.
Information that someone was tapped on the shoulder somehow and did some business to do this. Some information was passed along.
You wonder if you worked there at all or not, but you have been living with your folks for a long time. Don't they know? Did you ever ask them what you were doing in these time
We
periods?
had no time loss. They returned
They
him
returned him
immediately
before-
after.
Just before it happened.
Yeah.
Before it happened. So he was never gone. Even though he could have been out looking for himself
I
during
came
that time,
home
he was
from
not
work.
gone.
So freaking tired.
I do.
We essentially lived a couple of years in 1 year.
Yeah,
How do you make a living
I went through
normally?
the
I
same
mean, let's
thing.
say outside of this project.
as a microwave engineer.
And you're still getting a check,
Oh, yeah.
paycheck or whatever.
I
you
come
want.
home from work, I felt like I'd worked 20 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours,
Probably
anywhere in there.
worked even more.
And since about 83, I haven't had that. Since 83, I've been fine. But from about 75 until 83, God was I tired. But I wouldn't remember any of it because they would bring me back to milliseconds before I left and it'd be a closed loop. But the experience and the education would come through. That's why I went into metaphysics. But this other project, I was heavily in metaphysics. Originally, before that, I was a nuts and bolts electronics type person. I didn't even metaphysics. That was my reaction.
Yeah.
But
This is for idiots type
yeah,
thing.
but because I'd done so much in this other function, it's still enough filtered through that I developed an interest in this, what you want to call this life, if you want to say, of metaphysics. And that was their downfall. Because it was that that made me conscious of what was going on at Montauk was the source of these interfering signals. Of course they were interfering signals. They were fouling up my research in no end.
Was there any sense of all these experiences that you were doing, going into the future, etc., and all of that there was some real higher force, there was a higher force that existed who sort of was more in control than the people were at the station? You know, people have their little kingdoms and they think that they rule the world in a sense, but as you were going through the experience, did you sense higher forces, much higher forces, that really have something to do to say about destiny and how things go on this planet? Very mystical experience is what I'm saying.
Well, since Duncan is deferring to me on that one, I'll try to answer it. I would say that during that period itself, looking back on it, there was no awareness on my part, and I don't think there was any on Duncan's part, of such a higher agency, if you will, directing our efforts at that point. I would say very definitely there was before that point, and at some time in the past we were aware of it, though perhaps not in our respective earlier lifetimes, this lifetime, but further back. And since then, very definitely, that there was some kind of, if you will pardon the expression, a divine plan involved in this whole thing, which is very, very difficult to explain, is very difficult to extrapolate on. There was a reason for all of this happening. I know that without any question. What that reason is still not clear. And I think Duncan would agree that, yes, he knows that there was some kind of a reason for it. Preston would probably agree with it. And he's looking at it from the mathematical and the nuts and bolts end of it to try and come up with a reason. And it's not easy. Yes, there was a reason why it happened. If you go back into, as I will shortly, go back into the Philadelphia experiment end of it, which was the beginning of the whole business, one can see from the way that thing was maneuvered that there was a higher hand of some kind involved in setting the whole thing up, because it would never have happened the way it did unless two obscure dates, 40 years apart, coincided with two experiments.
If I could just add something directly to your question, quickly. Having to do a scene and knowing possibly some other intelligentsia, there's a function of the time tunnel where a person, or in my experience per se, it's the only thing I can relate to, when a person moves through a number of procedures, there's a point in maybe 2/3 down the tunnel as perceived where there's a very big thump. The energy leaves the body. There's a tendency to see on a broad scale. I can only answer that question theoretically. Looking back on it, I'm sure there is and there was some intelligence there, certainly higher form than we know. As to the recognition of it, I would have trouble in that sense, but there is what I call a full out, where the energy leaves the body, and there's a tendency to see on a very broad scale. That's partially what they were trying to do at Montauk, is to stabilize and to freeze what I call a full out, the seeing process.
They didn't want you to see it, is that what you're saying?
No, they were trying to manifest that.
Oh, they were.
For whatever their purpose is.
And in your travels, did you ever go back in time and see of your own lifetime? Did they ever ask you to do that?
No.
Because it would seem to me that you could do that.
You could, it would be
theoretically.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be in your interest.
No, but I just wondered if they ever asked you to.
I have no information directly, but theoretically it's very possible to influence a person's function, however back so far.
What was the role of the aliens at all? I mean, other than the chair, which they had
Okay,
given you?
that would be the earlier part of this that we haven't got into yet.
Okay.
Let's look at another little sideline here. What was done, one of the cute little trips that they made was they made a trip from 83 back to 63 and installed him in a new body. That's all I knew of it, that they installed him in a new body. I don't know why, but Al can of course tell us why.
Yeah.
I think this would be a good time to, let's go in and discuss the Philadelphia experiment. Why don't I first give like a general overview of what they did technologically?
Can we take 5 or 10 directly?
Sure.
Is that adequate?
Yeah, let's
Please.
take a
break.
Yeah,
take a break.
Great, please, thank you.
Dodge Caravan before the front got broken. Backed up to the main door in the back of the big building. This is the main radar building. This really, we should go to this picture later. That's essentially what it is.
All I know is what I got here. I don't know what the deal is.
All right, let's go to the next picture. It's out of focus. This is leaving the site. Of course, there's my car again. And the red building is one of the old leftover radar buildings that they didn't use. The round things, we don't know what the hell the round things were.
Mary?
The street coming out.
Okay.
That's the back end of the main antenna. This thing is an antenna which is roughly 300 foot by 200 foot. And that tower that goes this way, the gain horn is mounted on. That's the omnidirectional antenna. And the little thing on top, that's shaped like that, is the IFF antenna. They didn't use the IFF.
Is this for the project?
Yeah. This is the transmitter? This is the transmitter. You're looking at the transmitter. In fact, anyone that has any sensitivities, this is a full shot of the building. Anybody that has any sensitivity can probably feel the energies coming off this picture.
This is a fallen tower, or
We
what?
have a an extra tower.
Do we have a pointer for him so he doesn't have to... Pointer, something, a stick or something.
Oh, yes, we have a
Okay.
Here it is when the pointer comes. This is going to be a riot using a fireplace. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 floors in this structure. Each one is about 100 foot square.
This is the transmitter?
This is the transmitter building. The transmitter was on this floor, and this was the antenna controller. All these ducts here are cooling for the transmitter.
That's just sitting there open?
Yep,
We're looking for a lawsuit.
yep.
Go ahead.
This is another picture, another site, another picture of the building with the antenna. Again, you can see doors you can look out. This is all open. We know it was open as of September.
You can walk inside the building?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
This is a shot.
Alternate reality.
This is just essentially background. Let's keep going. This is another one of those round structures. What they did with these in the project, if anything, we don't know, and they didn't look maintained. You can see it's all rusted over here, here, but you can see that other building was maintained. This was like about 85, these pictures were taken. Okay. This is a shot from the roof looking up at the antenna. This is a catwalk. People walk here. You get an idea of the massive size of this thing.
This is the antenna?
This is the antenna, transmitting antenna. This is shot out over, that's the ocean, from the roof of the building.
Going to change a bit here.
This is the group. This person should be familiar. That person should be familiar. This is my friend Jeff that comes up from Maryland. That's the guy that plays Rambo running around the woods.
Now those buildings in the back?
That's two of those round buildings. You can see they haven't been maintained. Look at the doors here.
Did you go inside of them?
Yeah.
And you couldn't tell what it was all about?
There isn't anything in them. Nothing in them. Those are cleaned out.
And those buildings you can still walk in now?
If they haven't boarded up, sure. I don't know. This is a picture of what they call omnidirectional antenna. This is what the antenna they use. In fact, if you look, you see all the wires feeding in, all the coax cables feeding in. This they use to send out a signal, but we believe they use this more for picking up signals. This will pick up a return from the person that they were targeting. Because it has one huge cable that goes up to it and a bunch of little cables for receivers. And they control the different dipoles on this. Okay, let's go. This is a general shot of the antenna. That's the gain horn. See, they were first focusing this so the signal would go in, bounce off, come out. But they finally realized that they didn't want the Hertzian component to reflect it, so they positioned it so the gain horn pointed right at the subject. That's the way they eventually developed this thing so it worked right.
Outside.
Outside,
The
yes.
subject was outside.
The subject was in another building that was downrange.
The focal point was at that building.
Yeah. This is a distance view of the thing. You can get an idea how massive it is.
What are these dimensions approximately?
300 feet by 200, 150 feet. 100 feet this
125
way.
tons for the antenna and 125 tons for the control mechanism on the roof.
That's the pedestal here.
125 tons each.
This weighs 125 tons and this is about 200 tons.
Did you help design this transmission antenna?
No, that was part of the Sage.
Okay.
The wiped out shot. But this is interesting. This is essentially the main building. This is the transmitter building. This is the control center where all the computers were, and this was offices.
Where was the subject?
Down the hill that way.
Okay, in another building, yeah.
Now those buildings are still there, are they
Oh, yeah.
open?
This one is open. I'm told this one is open, and this one is open, and the powerhouse is open. This is a distance shot. You're 2 miles away here from the building. Montauk Highway. Same thing. You're 2 miles away here. I don't know what that is. Oh yeah, you're further away. This is now just, this is in the town still. This is like about 5 miles away here. That's the building.
And no telephone.
And what about this camera?
This building here is where they had the subject. This is the... How many people know what the planetary grid is?
I know. Yeah.
This is one of the cross points of the grid.
Wow.
You stand here, you'll feel the grid.
And it's still there.
Yep.
That's flat of land.
And if we have the right picture, you'll see they arranged the buildings around the cross point like the Indians arrange mounds of rock around the cross points. These buildings tune the cross point. But they focused, if I remember, on that building, is where they had the subject. You know, these buildings are... Duncan verified it. That's where he was.
Okay.
Duncan has a tendency to flip when he sees stuff like this. Okay, let's go to the next one. That's me. Standing next to the radar site 5 miles away. And you see my welding glasses.
Yeah.
Another shot. You can go on. That's extraneous.
Do these power lines go straight to that
Yep.
location?
They go straight to that
And all they
location.
are is to carry...
Those high tension.
Wow.
Right here, you can see the high tension line.
Are they still active?
Oh yeah. Those are what supply the point. Okay.
I mean, are they active?
Here's a picture of the pedestal. These are motors. 4 of them. The motors are gone today.
This is on the roof.
This is on the roof.
Motors are gone?
Yeah, someone took the motors. How? I don't know.
And how they got them down, right.
Oh, that's
If they pushed them off and let them crash, there'd be big crevices in the ground, but we didn't heard of any crevices. Train freaks may have taken these, and these are the same motors that run the big locomotives. This is a picture of the gain horn. This is the thing, this is about the size of my Volkswagen Rabbit at the time. This is what actually sent the signal out. It went out like this. More weight guide went down the catwalk and went into the building.
We're looking at it sideways?
Yeah. Oh, there's the UFO landing pad.
That was a landing pad, right.
What is that?
That's the only one of these round little buildings that's maintained.
Oh, right. What is your big building?
Okay, that's an old radar building that wasn't maintained. This is the main operations center. This is where they had all the computers. And the chair was right below this building, we figure. And then that's the office building there. That's where Jack Pruitt and what's his place?
Which building was the subject in? Can we see it there?
Huh?
Can we see the building the subject was in from here?
No.
Okay.
Another same area, essentially. You notice these are not maintained. This one's nicely maintained. Some people believe thoroughly that they landed UFOs here. This is a shot of the lighthouse from the roof.
Well, the lighthouse isn't far away.
No.
Wow.
One of those two little buildings?
Maintenance buildings or something.
These are maintenance buildings?
I don't think they've been used.
Structure on the right, where's that?
That's the red radar site. There's a big bubble on top of that at one time, but I've been there for years. Same shot. Just different lens.
This base had been constructed in World War II or something like that?
You know, after the 50s. Looks like we just had that shot.
No, this is the view of it.
Yeah.
He took a lot of shots.
Yes, Jan took tons of shots.
What is this?
That is what's left of the old Fort Hero. There was gun emplacements in there. There's a emergency generator in that building now. Well, there was. Closest I could figure from the wiring.
Where were the 4 megawatt generators?
You'll see it. No, you'll see it. Go on. That's another shot of the red building.
Why a pink building?
Which was the building where there were marks, you say, on the wall?
All of them. I don't know if we got good enough detail to see them. I don't know why he took a shot at that, but
He liked it.
he liked it.
Show me what you got here.
Same thing.
There. Can we go in a distance?
I think the screen.
That's the Ma Bell Tower. He took a shot of that too.
Right, Felipe.
He took a shot of that one. The Ma Bell building, of course, is at the base of it. Something new and different. I never understood why. Oh yeah, this is a maintenance shed. This is the diesel tank that ran the generators. Okay, there's the building that the subject was in, from the roof. There's the cross point, and there's the tuning buildings around the cross point. The government built this, and the state, this is a state park today, the state's been told they cannot tear these buildings down.
Oh, really?
Yep.
They cannot what?
They cannot tear these buildings down.
Are they being maintained? Can you still get in them? What?
I don't know.
You didn't try to.
Can you go inside those?
I've been in the building, but I don't know if they're open.
When you're in it, psychically?
Oh yeah, even I can pick it up, and I have the sensitivity
You
of a
can
rock.
just drive there and walk into those buildings.
Well, you drive in the parking lot of Montauk Point State Park and then walk back.
Now, is that
About 2
gate
miles.
there? Is that the gate
2 mile
separating the
walk.
state park from the?
This is just pipes going over the building,
Okay, but
over the walkway.
you can't drive there.
No, you can't drive up here. They got gates that are closed.
Okay.
But you can walk in and around and you can get there.
I saw cars there when you were there.
Well, we had their permission to be in there to take pictures and stuff like that. This is just another shot of over there. You can see how far away they were focusing, and they were focusing right on this building.
Yeah.
It was right in line of sight.
But you can't drive into the main base.
No, not now.
No,
No.
you just gotta walk through.
You gotta walk in.
Yeah, especially on a cul-de-sac. You have permission, when did you go with the cars?
This was May.
When it was warm.
86.
May of '86.
Yeah.
You have a letter?
Yeah, we had a letter.
Is that letter no good now?
No, it's not any good now.
What is that tank?
This is the diesel fuel tank that ran the generator station.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know why he took a picture of that. Except you can see again the building where the subject was of the early experiments. Same thing. There's the building again.
Now, interesting here.
Let's keep going. There's the powerhouse. This thing is 4 huge diesel generators, and you can see the cooling towers for each. They used 2, they had one ready to go, and one was being repaired.
How big were those things? Did you say?
Megawatt.
I mean, how physically, how big? How long? High?
Size of a locomotive. Locomotive engines, essentially.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, if the power went out coming in on those trunk lines, though, that wouldn't be enough power to power this
Well, they
vortex, would it?
originally used this to run the station, but what happened, they discovered when they turned on, it created such time disturbances, it gave the generators the heebie-jeebies and they went down. So they put the generators down permanently and ran off the loco.
Right.
But the generators had the heebie-jeebies. This is another shot of the power station.
Oh, you were really in there.
Yep. Another shot over, I think this is the bay between the ports. Same thing.
Where the antenna is?
That's one part of the antenna.
I don't know if this is... I got this right.
That's a shot of that other gantry from the roof. You saw that thing next to my car.
Yeah.
See, that hasn't been maintained either.
Do I have it right?
Yeah. There's stuff strewn all over the space.
Now, are you saying that this 30-foot creature was doing stuff to things like this, or no?
Yeah, we think that was a part of it.
Ripped it off, you mean?
Yeah. But if I see anything that's obvious, I'll let you know.
Oh no, there's not a whole lot more here. Okay. There's a lot of duplicates that I didn't use.
No, that's nothing. You've seen that.
Now we go inside.
Yeah, okay. That's a choke. That's a charging reactor.
Can you focus that a little better?
Can you speak a little louder, please?
This is what they call a charging choke. This is a filter choke, I'm sorry. The rectifiers are up in there. They had big multi-disc rectifiers up in there. You know, what I call hockey pucks. Huh?
What type of material are they using to rectify something like
Silicon.
Yeah, solid state, so.
I call them hockey pucks.
silicon or selenium?
Silicon. I call them hockey pucks. This is one of the power tubes. This is called an amplitron. That's the tube right there. And those are the magnets for it. And the pulse transformer is in this oil-filled tank. And this crane lifts this thing out.
How big is that diameter on the anode?
3 foot.
This part of the equipment that was that had to be destroyed, or is it just?
No, they left this behind. Let's go on. This is a tube fully assembled with all the magnets on it. This thing is about 6 foot tall from here to here.
Preston, that would never be used for radar, is that correct?
They originally used it for radar. This was long distance radar.
Uh-huh.
But then they rebuilt them. Another shot of the amplitron. I never noticed a red floor before. Is Al here?
Yeah, I'm here.
You ever notice a red floor?
No.
Something funny going on.
When we were in there, part of it was red. And I don't recall what parts.
This is a close-up of the amplitron.
When you look at the walls in the back of that, you can see the marks.
It's just depends on all this equipment. It's very unusual.
This is some of the acetylene torch marks where they cut the waveguides to stop it. This is the power transformer. This thing probably is about 12 tons. This is the type of thing I tell Duncan move. He grunts, he groans a little, and he moves it.
Mungo-like beams.
Yeah. This is a Thyratron. This is the main pulse modulator. They use 4 of these things. This is about 2.5 foot tall, this tube. It's about 6 inches in diameter.
Wow.
And they had 4 of these in parallel to fire off the pulse forming network.
That wasn't just sitting there, was it?
Yeah,
I hope you got it.
yes.
Oh, good.
Well, this is one of the ones that's broken. I got complete ones, good ones.
These were made in the 50s?
These particular ones were made in the 80s.
Wow.
But they were designed in the 50s. That's 500 Gauss magnet. That's the plate on one of the magnets you can go on. That doesn't mean a hell of a lot.
Except for the stamp stereo.
Yeah, what's outside?
That's for... I don't know what that is.
Anyway, that's it.
Wonder where the class building is.
The what?
Wonder where the class building is.
It might have been some of the others. I got some more here if you want to run through them.
It's up to you guys.
They're all
If you
duplicates.
want to run through quick, go ahead.
I didn't see it, Preston, as a duplicate.
They're all duplicates.
There was also better pictures showing the torch marks.
Could be. I'll do it. You want? Okay.
It's up to you guys.
No, let's do it. Whatever.
If you want to do it, you can go through quick. It's that same thing. Go on.
Zip too fast.
I'm good.
Another shot of the portal, of the vortex,
Another portal.
of the cross point. I'm sorry. Same thing.
Didn't seem to stop me from running a power line
Okay.
on top of it.
Can you back up one?
Yeah.
Back up to what you had there, say, before.
I'm here, right?
Between that one is a different time period of the day. The energetics of that picture as opposed to the next one is very different.
Maybe another sensor can pick that up.
As in higher or lower, better, worse, or just different?
These are at random now.
Whoops.
Another picture of the magnetron.
Okay.
I mean,
There's gonna be a lot of them.
Yeah, I know. Jan took loads of those.
Do what you want. These are
Same thing.
different.
Same thing. Go on. Go on.
Going as fast as you can.
Especially he's got it loaded.
I know. That's another shot of the
Any
power
more
welding.
welding shops that you see?
Those insulators.
No.
See?
Well, this thing provided 20 kV. Another shot. That's the same thing. Go on.
There's the torch marks, which are not as clear.
Yeah. Same thing. Go on. You say there's lots of those.
Okay. Gonna jump outside.
Okay, this is a closer shot of the antenna, but not close enough. You can see all the cables going in this box on the bottom. They're doing phased array work with this thing. You see cables running up it. These are dry. This is a series of dipoles. He's got a close-up of this somewhere in there.
This is Over the Horizon radar.
Yes, it is. That doesn't matter. That's all fuzzed out. I guess you also picked up the bad ones.
Well, I told you I took them out, but you want to see those.
Same thing. Keep going. I'm going to run them quick.
Best I can.
Yep. That's a dud.
Yeah, back in.
Isn't better than walking through the place.
It's better.
That's the burning?
Yeah, that's the burning.
Outside again, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. That's the gain horn.
And these are no value to them now, to use somewhere else.
Well, I'm sure they're valuable.
Sure they are.
Of course, more to transport than...
No, then build it, put somebody back in business, right?
That's the cop's car.
You come out to see what you were doing?
Yeah. Cop came in and looked in every couple of hours.
Really?
It's a shot of the whole town, like, that's Fort Hero right there.
We had a permit to get in there,
Yeah.
a day permit.
Another shot of the antenna. Let's keep
How
going.
difficult is it to get a permit?
Very.
How'd you
The
manage?
fellow got it through the alleged connection to the senator. Continue. That's another amplitron. Another one. Continue. You can tell when they left. They took off in a hurry. You can see there's junk strewn everywhere. The military doesn't leave it like this.
How many of those tubes were there?
2.
What did they, yeah, I guess that's.
Continue, that's the same thing. Another shot.
That's a welding torch up there?
There's 2 big ones. Big ones here. Notice they're always where this would turn and go up.
What were they cutting at? Was there something coming out of the wall?
Yes. The weight guide went up like this. This thing was quite disassembled.
I wouldn't cut that thing running with, I wouldn't want an open waveguide.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't. Another shot of the tube. I can assure you I didn't cut it apart. Another shot of the tube, big deal.
They probably ordered some privates to do it who didn't know what
What
was
if
going
things
on.
like
No, Pruitt himself did.
He did? Pruitt himself did that?
Pruitt himself cut it apart.
He must have been desperate.
What would a tube like this cost?
This is a C-23J, which today is about $4,500. Another shot of the Amplatron.
The Amplatrons are a little more expensive, I guess.
Yeah. The Amplatron is worth about $250,000.
Each one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another